Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world. So today, we're going to be looking at Andy Norman's book, Mental Immunity. We're actually using it as a case study, a way to understand this really critical system, how a society defends itself from bad ideas. This is our concise, structural companion to his work. Now, just a quick heads up here, this isn't a book summary and we're not handing out advice. Nope. This is a systems analysis. So we'll start with the system itself, then we'll look at the incentives that make it tick or fail, the outcomes of that failure, why the problem persists, and finally, how it all connects.
Okay, let's dive right in. First things first, we've got to clearly identify the system we're even talking about. Norman calls it cognitive immunity.
So what is cognitive immunity, really? Well, you can see the formal definition, but basically, it's the whole collection of our social and psychological defenses that help us filter ideas. You can think of it like a society's shared toolkit for telling the difference between a good idea and a bad one. All right, now that we have a feel for the system, let's move on to our second section and see what makes it go. We need to look at the incentives that can mess with it. This is all about why bad ideas seem to spread like wildfire. And that brings us to a huge question. Why do bad ideas, or mind parasites, as Norman calls them, why are they so darn effective at spreading? Well, the answer really comes down to the psychological and social rewards they offer. You see, bad ideas often spread because they tap into our deepest needs, our need for an identity, the simple comfort that comes with certainty, that amazing feeling of belonging, and of course, our social status.
And here's the kicker. These social incentives, they can be way more powerful than our simple desire to be right. You know, as the decision scientist Dan Kahan's work shows, when our very identity feels like it's on the line, our reasoning just goes haywire. We stop searching for the truth and start protecting our tribe.
And it's not just our own psychology at play here. Dogma, by its very design, can short-circuit this whole system. It just builds these walls around certain beliefs, protecting them from any kind of real scrutiny or evidence. And that, of course, just shuts down our ability to correct ourselves. Oh, and in today's world, you can just pour gasoline on that fire with the attention economy, which rewards crazy, emotional content way more than it rewards accuracy. Okay, so when these incentives take the wheel and our cognitive immunity gets weaker and weaker, what happens? What are the results we can predict? That brings us to our third section, the outcomes, or as we're calling it, reason unhinged. So what are the predictable outcomes when these incentives take hold and weaken our cognitive immune system? You know, a good metaphor can really help make the stakes crystal clear here. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it reframes the whole problem. I want you to think of our shared information environment like a public water supply. If the shared filtration system, the standards, if they break down way upstream, the problem isn't just one person with a dirty glass of water. No, the entire system starts pumping out contaminated ideas to everybody. The health of that whole ecosystem really depends on these shared standards, what Norman calls reason's fulcrum, that central point that all good judgment balances on. When that fulcrum gets weak, like you see on the left, you get way more misinformation, more polarization. But when it's strong, the system gets more resilient. It actually starts correcting its own mistakes, and fast. And that right there brilliantly shows the two different paths a society can take. But it leads to a really important question, which is the focus of our fourth section, persistence. If the damage is so obvious, why do these problems stick around?
Yeah, I mean, if the outcomes are so bad, why do these weak defenses just persist? Why doesn't the system naturally fix itself?
The answer, and this is so crucial, takes us right back to those incentives we talked about earlier. The system stays weak because, well, we get rewarded for loyalty to our group's beliefs, not for changing our minds when we see new evidence. We get social points for certainty and tribal loyalty, not for being correct.
So the crucial point here is that this isn't about people being dumb. This is not a failure of individual minds. It's a failure of the system's design. It's about the social game that we are all incentivized to play. And this, right here, this reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of the problem we face today. The crisis in perception is mistaking misinformation as isolated bad content, rather than a systems failure in incentive design and shared standards. Seeing the problem at that systems level is the absolute first step. And that brings us to our final section, interconnection. Because this system of belief, it doesn't just exist in a bubble. It's part of a much bigger web. Our cognitive immune system is literally woven into the fabric of our society. As you can see here, it's deeply connected to our education systems, our media platforms, how we decide who's a legitimate leader, and even cultural norms that either reward or punish things like intellectual humility.
All these big systems, they can either act like a booster shot for our collective defenses, or they can create the vulnerabilities that just let bad ideas run rampant. So if our beliefs are so deeply shaped by all these interconnected systems, what does it take to actually see them clearly?
Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a longer audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.